Well, today we have a reaction video from another progressive Christian TikToker. This time it's Maddie Mae Modal, who is a PhD candidate and Bible scholar, and she's going to give us her super smart, educated arguments defending bisexuality from the Christian worldview. Let's watch.
I am a bisexual Bible scholar. Hi, my name is Maddie Mae Modal. I'm a Bible scholar specializing in gender and sexuality. And in honor of National Coming Out Day, which was yesterday, I thought I would come on here and make a video about what the Bible actually says about bisexuality. Alright, before you come at me, bisexuality is a modern concept. The Bible never uses the word bisexual because the Bible was written long before sexual orientation was even an acknowledged phenomenon. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so in theory, you could stop the video there because the Bible can't condemn something it doesn't talk about. And the Bible never talks about consensual loving sex as we understand it today.
So right off the bat, the very first argument is frankly terrible. She says bisexuality is never mentioned in Scripture, and therefore the Bible cannot condemn something that it never mentions. This is wrong on both premises. Being bisexual is basically just a fancy word for sometimes being gay. It is being sexually and romantically attracted to people of both genders, and this would logically lead to being sexually and romantically attracted to people of the same gender, which is just called homosexuality. Calling it bisexuality and giving it a special name might make you feel unique, but it's really just another form of homosexuality with extra steps. And the Bible has a lot to say on that topic. Therefore, it absolutely does have something to say directly about bisexuality. In the Old Testament, God creates the paradigm and ideal for marriage, sexuality, and procreation in the beginning. So we see that a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, Genesis 2:24. The Israelite law then calls homosexual activity an abomination and even prescribes the death penalty for it, Leviticus 20:13. And then we see Jesus himself continue the clear pattern of Scripture when he quotes the Old Testament man and wife passage in Matthew 19:5. And of course, the Apostle Paul continues the pattern of condemning homosexuality in Romans 1, calling it dishonorable, unnatural, and shameful. All of these passages would apply to any homosexual behavior, including those done in the name of bisexuality. Being a PhD candidate doesn't change that, and claiming the title of Bible scholar won't change it either. But let's continue.
But let's have some fun with the idea of bisexuality and what that would have meant in the Greco-Roman world. Sexual fluidity was extremely common in antiquity. In the Greco-Roman world, bisexual behavior, especially among men, was common and culturally accepted. Men frequently had relationships with both men and women. Now again, this wasn't necessarily a great thing because consent was not expected or presupposed in these sexual interactions. The bisexuality of Greco-Roman men often had to do with social roles, power dynamics, and hierarchy, not fixed sexual orientations. But this does mean that New Testament readers would have assumed that sexual fluidity was normal. Because bisexual attraction was so normalized, and maybe even at times expected, this does make it sort of interesting that the New Testament authors never explicitly condemn bisexuality as an attraction.
So now the argument is that bisexuality would have been seen as, quote, common and culturally accepted, which is interesting to Maddie since bisexuality is, quote, never explicitly condemned as an attraction in the New Testament. This is a ridiculous argument from silence. Sure, I'll grant that some form of bisexuality or homosexuality was practiced in the Greco-Roman world, but this proves exactly nothing, other than the fact that pagans commit sins, which, for those who have read the Bible, will come as no surprise. As mentioned before, Paul condemns homosexuality in the strongest possible terms in Romans 1. But before that, Paul explicitly mentions that these people, quote, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God, nor give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So of course Paul knew that pagan unbelief in the Roman world would inevitably lead to a society full of unnatural sins. That's the point of Romans 1. The fact that bisexuality was pervasive in the Roman world then proves our point, not the progressive Christians' point. But Maddie also says that bisexuality would have been viewed as normal by the writers of the New Testament because of how pervasive it was. This sounds compelling, but it's actually not. The problem is her use of the word normal. Would they have seen it as normal in the sense that it was widespread and commonplace? Maybe. But would they have seen it as normal in the sense that it was proper or natural or in accordance with nature, or that it should be looked upon in some sort of good way? Absolutely not. In Romans 1, Paul explicitly says that they, quote, gave up natural relations to participate in homosexuality. So part of Paul's argument is that it is unnatural. You can't just wish that away because you're progressive or because it violates your personal identity or feelings. But let's continue.
Instead, the New Testament focuses on specific harmful sexual behaviors that were exploitative or idolatrous. The authors of the New Testament had a real problem with abuses of power, lustful excess, and injustice, rather than the reality or maybe even the assumption that a person can be attracted to multiple genders at one time.
Now pay attention here because there's another massive problem. Maddie says that the New Testament writers were not against bisexual acts per se, but they were against abuse and injustice in sexual relationships. This again is a half-truth at best. What she's not telling you is that the New Testament would have only allowed for sexual activity within marriage. 1 Corinthians 7:2-3, quote, "But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband." So yes, the Bible assumes that the pagan culture is committing sexual immorality, and that people may be tempted to do so. But its solution to this is not merely to put a ban on the excesses or abuses. That's a progressive fairy tale. No, its real solution is natural marriage between a man and a woman. The implication here is that any sexual activity outside of marriage violates the biblical ideal. And this is why this has far and away been the most dominant view of Christians throughout church history. It's basic biblical theology. The progressive obsession with individual freedom and choice leads them to recreate the Bible in their own image. As a result, the only sexually immoral behavior, in their view, is not what violates the law of God, but rather what violates the free choice of man. So everything hinges on consent or being nice. But let's hear the absurd conclusion of where this is all going.
So maybe you're bisexual like me. I would like you to know this. Your capacity to love across genders is not a flaw. Instead, it's a reflection of the complexity and beauty with which you were made. God is not asking you to deny your identity, but instead they invite you to live it out with love, integrity, and faithfulness. So next time someone tries to tell you it's a sin to be bisexual, you can tell them, that's just not biblical, sis.
Okay, first off, I'm not sure how she can say that's not biblical when the majority of her argument wasn't even based on the Bible. It was based on cultural norms, and the only part that touched on the Bible was arguing based on silence, not based on any quoted passage. But she also says that, quote, "Your capacity to love across genders is not a flaw, rather it shows the beauty and complexity with which you were made." This is completely wrong. Bisexuality does not demonstrate that you have a special, unique capability or skill. After all, we wouldn't say this about any other sin. Are thieves uniquely gifted and courageous for stealing other people's stuff? Are drunkards uniquely gifted and courageous for consuming excess alcohol? Of course not. Sin does not make you special because everyone sins. In fact, it's one of the only things that everyone does. It is acts of virtue that are unique. Sin is easy, but virtue and righteousness are not. So why the confusion? Why is this all being flipped around? Well, the progressive worldview puts the self-identity above all other things. You heard her say it herself. That is because in this worldview, the self is God. When the Bible contradicts your personal identity, you can just twist it and reject it. When the church contradicts your identity, you can just call them legalistic and leave. And in the end, progressives like this will attempt to craft all sorts of pseudo-intellectual arguments and extensive proofs in order to get around the obvious facts. Most importantly, that they are not practicing historic biblical Christianity. So let's continue to correct this kind of false teaching wherever it's found, for the glory of God. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and check out the next one. Fight for Truth is powered by viewers like you. Become a monthly patron and get a free Fight for Truth mug as a thank you. Link in description. Help us reach our goal of 100 patrons so that we can make more videos. Thank you, and God bless.